I probably should have been a lawyer. God knows I argue too damn much. Sometimes it's about something I'm passionate about. Sometimes it's just to be contrarian and try to get others to see things a different way. And sometimes it's just for sport. And a little known fact about me, I am a huge Supreme Court junkie. Love it. Like, love everything about it. And I've read The Brethren and The Nine, both 3 times each. I read Supreme Court decisions like they are romance novels. Not even kidding. Not a big surprise to anyone. Yes, I'm a nerd. And sometimes I think the Supreme Court and lawyers in general can get a bad rap. Don't get me wrong. There are plenty of lawyers who are unscrupulous and useless. Usually, those are called politicians. But there are also many who study and then practice the law because they really hope to do good and hope to have a positive impact on the world around them. There are many lawyers who seek fairness and who try to be impartial and have integrity, to hold wrongdoers to account and help stand up for the weak. Now, attorneys, they're all human too, so they most certainly have their own opinions about things, and sometimes they interpret the laws differently. But good judges and good lawyers do try to serve justice and respect the law. And the very best of those attorneys have an incredible impact, sometimes on history itself. I'm Clay Aiken, and Politicon's guest this week on How the Heck Are We Gonna Get Along is just that kind of lawyer. Jill Wine-Banks was a Watergate prosecutor who later became the first woman to serve as general counsel for the U.S. Army, and then became the first woman to be the executive director of the American Bar Association. And she is a member of the Politicon family herself. She is serving as a co-host for 2 Politicon podcasts, #Sisters-in-Law, and the brand new intergenerational discussion, iGen Politics. She's on this week, and I'll ask her, how much have things changed in D.C. since the Watergate era? Do politicians just not trust each other anymore? Do we as Americans not trust each other anymore? Would any changes in the political system actually even improve our polarization if we've all decided what we're going to believe anyway? And of course, I'll ask her, how the heck are we going to get along? Right. No, but I am sort of like, the Supreme Court. I don't know why it fascinates me so much. I have read The Brethren and The Nine 3 times each.
Good books.
Listened to the audio books, and I'm such a Supreme Court nerd that I have favorite justices. Do you have favorite justices?
I do.
Who are yours?
I do. And mine go back a long way.
Who are they?
Well, of course, Ruth Bader Ginsburg has to be at the top of the list. Sandra Day O'Connor, because she was the first. All the other women that are on now.
So 2 others.
Marshall is an old favorite. Anne Brennan.
Yeah.
And, those are some. Oh, Douglas, partly because of his personality.
'Cause he's a little crazy.
His decisions too, but he was such a great outdoorsman. And I was friends with his, I don't know what number wife it was, Kathy, who was quite a bit younger than he was, who survived him. And I like all of them. And of course, Justice Breyer, because he is a Watergate colleague of mine.
Oh, so right. Oh, right. I didn't even think of that.
And his younger brother is a judge, too.
Actually,
his younger brother's...
He's one of my favorites. He's actually near the top of my list.
Oh, good.
And it's because I don't know, there's something about Breyer and Kagan on the current court for me, who I feel even the ones who I can't stand, because I think that some of them are real. I can't stand a few of them. But I try my best to believe that even when I completely disagree with them, that at least six of the 9, sometimes 7 of the 9, are trying their best to decide cases without politics. They certainly interpret the law in very different ways than I would, but I feel like they do. But there's something about Breyer and Kagan who, just to me, and I don't know, you're the pro, they feel like the ones who are really doing their best to try to be more unifying and try to find ways to agree with the other people and compromise. Do you think?
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think Sotomayor would be in that same middle, trying to get along. And obviously Justice Roberts is in that category in ways that I would have never predicted. But he's turning out to be something that could save the court, because I think the court is at risk if it gets too terribly polarized. That's a problem.
It's rarer now that someone surprises in a decision, right? That it's not very often that someone makes you go, oh, whoa. I mean, Gorsuch occasionally can do that, right? He can occasionally decide something like the same-sex case not long ago where he decided, or he agreed that that's discrimination to fire someone who is gay. Occasionally there. But, why don't we appreciate that more from folks? Why do people get demonized almost more so when they are willing to buck their own group?
Well, in this environment, I would have to say that it is the lack of any bipartisanship. It is the silos of information that we are living in. We have Fox News sending out a message that says A, and then you have MSNBC that says not A. And people have chosen to listen to only the side that already reflects what they want to be the truth. And so there's not as much urge for compromise, and compromise is now viewed as a dirty word. I think what's happening now to Liz Cheney falls into sort of that category of, how could this be happening? I was heading there.
That's exactly what I was going to say, right?
Yeah.
Because she's also she's not progressive. That's for sure.
She is more conservative. I mean, you have Stefanik as being a possible replacement. Stefanik, who honestly, in the impeachment, was, to me, one of the worst members of Congress. It was horrible. She is not as conservative as Liz Cheney. I mean, she rates like, what, a 40% versus Cheney's 75%. Right.
She voted with Trump so much less, right?
Exactly. And how Republicans who want to be conservative could say, well, we can't have Cheney. It's only because she's willing to speak truth to power, and that means not supporting false information about Donald Trump. And so what's happened to the Republican Party? This is of grave concern, because I do believe we need a two-party system. And we don't have a two-party system if you have a cult around Donald Trump doing whatever he says, which is not based on policy. It's not based on a platform. There was no platform. The platform was Donald Trump. That's a big concern.
What is different? I mean, you obviously know more about Watergate than most people do. And, interestingly, that's just sort of the complete opposite response, in a way, from the party of a leader who had done something illegal, right? The Republicans did eventually say, listen, we aren't putting up with this crap. What is it that made that period in the 70s different than now?
I think we're back to the silos. Yeah. Back then, there were 3 networks and a couple of major national newspapers, and they all agreed on the facts. There weren't 2 different visions of America. There weren't 2 different sets of facts. There were different interpretations based on opinion. What's the policy that should follow from this fact? And Democrats and Republicans had different answers, but they did not disagree that things were facts. And from the very beginning, Watergate was actually bipartisan. Partly it was because of great leadership by Senator Ervin, and then when the impeachment started by Pete Rodino, the representative who was the chair of the Judiciary Committee, who involved the Republicans and treated them as equals. Republicans were pressed into service to draft the articles of impeachment. And then at the very end, after they had voted for 3 articles of impeachment, but before they got to even present it to the full House for a full House vote, the prosecutor, Watergate special prosecutor, had subpoenaed an additional 64 tapes for trial. So this was after the indictment, by which point we had gotten, 6 tapes, one with a 7th with an 18-minute gap and 2 that were not existing. But then we subpoenaed 64 more, and one of which became known as the smoking gun tape. And as soon as that was released, in which you could hear President Nixon say, yeah, let's use the CIA to stop the FBI from following the chain of the money. And it was in June, which meant he knew immediately about the break-in. He knew about the cover-up. And he had been saying all along he didn't know until March when John Dean told him, which is total nonsense. He knew the day of the break-in, he knew about it, and he knew that there was a cover-up going on. But when you hear the president in his own words saying, let's use my power to run this government to get the CIA to say that it's national security and they can't look at this, even though that was totally false. What they were trying to cover up was that it was the Republican campaign fund that paid for the break-in. And the money that was found on the burglars, the $100 bills, could be traced to the cashing of a campaign check in Miami by one of the burglars. That's where the $100 bills they had on them came from. And so that's when the Republicans went to the White House and said, we heard it. You're done. We will vote to convict you.
Play out, let's role play for a second, Jill Wine-Banks. What would have happened had that happened in 2020? Had that exact same scenario gone down, how would today's Republicans, Mitch McConnell and Matt Gaetz and Jim Jordan, have responded?
Well, an easier question to answer is, what would have happened in 1973, 74 if there had been a Fox News? And the answer is Richard Nixon would have served his full second term. And what would happen now is it's impossible to even contemplate that it would happen, because now Republicans have no wiggle room. They are playing to the people who vote in primaries, who are always the most extreme in a party.
Right.
They're the ones who are the most active. And so you're not looking at the middle of the road Republican. I don't know what's happened to the Republican Party, but it's not what we used to think of it as.
So I want to play contrarian here for a second, because you're one of the best legal minds, so you're going to be able to beat me at this, but I want you to. Is it not true? I mean, you're absolutely right about the fact that the Republicans play to their base, to their great detriment, probably, well, hopefully. But
yes.
Isn't it true that the Democrats do that also? I mean, were there any examples of, a broken clock is right twice a day. And were there not examples of times where Trump might not have been as awful as some of the things that were being said about him were? And I got to be careful as how I say that, because I think he was pretty awful. But but were there not moments, for example, and again, I don't think this was an acceptable thing for him to say, nor something I'd want to hear from the President of the United States, but the Billy Bush Access Hollywood tape, when he said what we all know he said on that tape. And for months and years after that, a lot of people in my party, on the Democrat Party, who were on the left, were saying that he bragged about abusing women. And for an attorney who knows how much words matter, Did he, or was he joking that he could? Did he actually ever grab a woman that way? Do we have proof that he did? I'm not defending him again, but didn't Democrats sometimes take things and use them to fire up their base occasionally?
I hope they do. They should.
Okay, fair.
But in that particular situation, I don't think there was anything overstated. I believe that he has, first of all, if you want proof, there are at least 18
fair.
women who have filed complaints against him for actual assault. Not just bad words, but assault. He does have 2 defamation cases that are for bad words, but they're because the women had been basically raped by him, and he denies it and says they're liars, and so they're suing because they want to prove they're not liars. So it does go back to that. Do I think in that Access Hollywood tape he was bragging? I do. I think he was saying, when you're a star, you can do this and get away with it. And he obviously...
He felt he could.
Women, he felt he could, and he did. So, yes, I think he was bragging. I thought that tape was the end of his campaign. I was sure that was... Who would have ever thought that it would take Harvey Weinstein to start the Me Too movement?
Right.
I was sure this was going to bring women to the front and say, we can't vote for this man. He's too awful. But obviously...
it was interesting because I was doing a piece for The View a few weeks after that, and I went to a Trump rally in Wilkes-Barre. Maybe it was a week. I think it was a week after it, actually. It was very, very close. Wow. And I asked them all about that same thing and said, so seriously, tell me how did you feel about that? And to a lot of people, they just felt, well, you know what? I don't think he really meant it. 2, I think it was just locker room talk. The same excuses that his allies gave. But, to a lot of people, it was, if he'll say something like that, he's not poll testing. He's being authentic. He's being real. And that might have worked. And there are times that I do wonder, again, I always feel like I have to preface these things by saying, I'm not defending him. I'm being contrarian on purpose, though. But I have heard Democrats at times, hell, I've probably done it myself, when rallying a crowd to say, we've got to go and fight like hell. We've got to go and fight like hell and show them X, Y, and Z. And that was not necessarily taken seriously by anybody I was speaking to. I don't rally anybody to fight for real because I'm a wimp. But when he used the terms fight like hell, those were used against him, and he was told that was actively him telling them to go and storm the Capitol. Have not Democrats done the same thing and gotten away with it only because their supporters were smart enough to not actually take it seriously?
Well, Clay, I think it's a great point, and I think it does cause one to pause. But where I come out is it all depends on the context. Mm-hmm. And in a situation like what we saw on January 6th, and with the lead up to it, where you had months of the election was stolen, you have to stop what was he telling people who were there? He said, march up Pennsylvania Avenue, go to the Capitol, and stop the steal. There was no way to stop the steal except through violence.
And it was a little bit more directed. You're right. March up Pennsylvania Avenue and fight like hell is different than...
That's different than saying, this is an issue that really matters to America. Fight like hell to support choice. Fight like hell to support the American worker. Fight like hell to support voter rights. Those are different things than fight like hell to stop the steal, which isn't a steal because the election was won fair and square, and it was won by an overwhelming number of votes. We're talking about, and remember, Donald Trump did not win the popular vote.
And he lost 2 pretty red states in the process, right?
But I'm saying even when he won the presidency, even the first time, he did not win Hillary had more votes than he did, but he won the election because of how unbalanced our electoral process is with the Electoral College, something that really needs to be looked at. But I just think you have to judge if Elizabeth Warren, who probably says fight like hell quite a lot, I'm going to guess, when she says it in the context and what she is talking about is something very different. Fight like hell for legislation, that's one thing. That means write to your congressman. Make sure that they know how you feel. And which brings us back to, how do Republicans in Congress, both Senate and House, vote against things that the overwhelming number of Republican voters actually support? They want these things. The Republicans and Democrats love the infrastructure bill. Why are Republicans voting against it?
They also said for 4 years they wanted to do it when Trump was saying he wanted to do it. I mean, listen, people who listen know people who listen know that I'm biased and will own it. But I mean, you make a strong point. But what would happen to them if all of the sudden a few like Jerry Moran from Kansas and, a few of the slightly more moderates ones, I don't know why his was the name that came to mind, but, Mitt Romney and Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins, what would happen to them in some of these states, especially like Jerry Moran in Kansas, where it is very dark red, if they dared compromise in any way and said, okay, we'll vote for your infrastructure bill in exchange for, X Republican. Why doesn't that get done anymore? I mean, by anybody.
Because, again, it is the media environment, but it's also gerrymandering.
Woo,
because
girl,
now
you just hit the jackpot with me.
yeah. That's what it is no member of Congress has to compromise anymore, because they've selected their voters, and their voters are a very narrow
But
group.
in the Senate, they ain't got that excuse. So
don't.
what's, and heck, Wyoming doesn't have the excuse. Granted, it's a very, very red state, but she's not gerrymandered into her district. I mean, I hate gerrymandering. We can talk for hours about that. But, I mean, did members of Congress, House and Senate, back in the 1970s, trust each other more, even if they disagree? Did they actually have a trust in each other that we don't have now?
I think that's a very good point. And I go back, I was in the Carter administration, and I was in college during Kennedy when he was elected. I was a freshman, but, it's within my adult memory in a way. And it used to be a time in Washington when Democrats and Republicans dined together, socialized together. All the socialites of Washington held dinner parties that were always bipartisan. And people were friends, and it wasn't considered evil to be friends with someone, and it wasn't considered evil to compromise. And that's what got done, was nobody got 100%. And therefore, the country won because something got done. And I saw a play called City of Conversation, I'm pretty sure is the name of it, which opened in Washington but played in Chicago. And it started during the Kennedy administration with a socialite giving a dinner party and how the conversation went and how things got done. And then it went into the Carter administration, where it started falling apart and there wasn't so much compromise, but there still was. And then the third act was Obama, when there was no conversation, and when the only thing to be done was make sure that he doesn't get anything he asked for. And we're sort of there now.
Well, I mean, Mitch McConnell straight up said that yesterday, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
yeah, exactly. So we're in the same situation where even if it's something that the people, the American voter, Democrat and Republican, love, congressmen are not voting for it. And that's a very dangerous place for us to be, because then we're in deadlock. Nothing gets done either way.
Wouldn't my mother say, she voted for Trump and all my family did, wouldn't they say that, well, that's the same thing that Nancy Pelosi and Maxine Waters and Rashida Tlaib said about Trump, that their number one priority was getting rid of him. I mean, it's not as much as I wish it were. And I will say this, spend a lot of time looking for ways that I can say that my own party needs to improve and it not be as bad as Democrats. And I can find a lot of parallels, but I've not yet been able to find one where it's as bad on our side as it is on that one.
Yeah.
But there are some similarities. I mean, right now, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, if I see any news about them online or see anything if I search Kyrsten Sinema's name on Google or Twitter, it's mostly hate against her from her own party for not being willing to be liberal enough. And I think to myself, guys, we've got 2 Democrats in states that ain't got no business electing Democrats. Can't we cut them some slack?
Well, it is a problem because of, for example, the voting suppression laws that are pending and the bills to free us at the federal level from that.
But both of them have supported changing voting.
But not getting rid of the filibuster. Right. And without getting rid of the filibuster, that's not becoming law. And so we're in trouble. And Manchin has particularly been outspoken not only about the filibuster, but, saying, oh, I'm working with some Republicans and we need to work together. I challenge him to name the Republicans he's working with and what the issues are and what he's working toward. Is it toward the Republican goal or is it toward the Democratic goal that he's working with them? Is he compromising away the Republican position or is he compromising away the Democratic?
Interesting take. I've been, people who listen to this show know that I've been really almost Manchin-esque skeptical about getting rid of the filibuster myself, only because I think, God, don't we realize that they're just going to turn around when they get power and maybe this is because I live in North Carolina where Democrats actually did have control of the state government for my entire life until 2010. For the first time in 150 years, all of a sudden Republicans had power and bam, they switched it all up and just totally got regressive out of nowhere. And I think to myself, don't we realize that as soon as Republicans get control again, they're just going to dismantle everything that we worked to put together by getting rid of the filibuster, and we won't have the power to stop them. That doesn't scare you?
Well, let me say there are a couple of solutions beyond total abolition of the filibuster. But let me start with the filibuster is not serving whatever purpose it was originally intended to serve. Right now, the filibuster means that the minority rules, not the majority. And of course, we have a very unbalanced system right now where you have 70% of American voters represented by 50 senators. And it may be 60%. It's 60 or 70% are represented by the 50 senators who are Democrats, and 30 or 40 are represented by the 50. And that 50 has much more control than the other 50.
Do you think they said the same thing when we were minority?
Remember, it is the Republicans who changed some of the filibuster rules for the courts, for example. So
Harry Reid changed it one time, and then McConnell changed it.
He did, but if we don't do it now, what's going to stop them from doing it when it's to their benefit?
That's the argument that I finally got right there.
It's that's a real issue, and there is a way. One of the best proposals I've heard for changing the filibuster is to allow the filibuster to be broken when senators representing 60% of the population vote to end it. So that would mean right now 50 Democratic senators represent more than 60%.
Right. Heck,
of the population.
Hell, you could probably get that handled with 6 states, right? The senators from New York, Florida, Texas, California, that's all you need in order to move it forward.
Illinois, let's throw in my state. Yeah, I mean, but that would be fair. If 60% of the population wants something, then why can't we have it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I could probably be convinced of that, but I will say that the argument that finally got me a few weeks ago was the one about, well, if we don't end it now, they're going to end it when they come back into power themselves. So might as well just. But that to me, again, is just based on nobody trusting anybody. Nobody's trusting anyone else to hold up norms. Republicans aren't trusting Democrats any more than I trust them.
Right. But you are right. I mean, I'm not suggesting that the Democrats are perfect. They aren't. I mean, yes, they will do some things, but none of the dirty stuff that we have seen in the last administration and continuing now with McConnell, have you ever seen the Democrats do? And there's many people who urge the Democrats to be more aggressive in defending what we want. And there's some truth to that. There's also some truth to the fact that the Republicans have communicated in a way better. They have better messaging. I mean, Donald Trump got it down to make America great again.
It's just...
And what did the Democrats have?
So
They've
funny
never had a counter.
When you talk to when I talk to Republicans, it's fascinating to me. They say the exact same thing about us and them. Republicans will say Democrats are so much better at messaging than we are. That's our problem, is that they can message so much better than we can, and they are and we don't play dirty. I mean, I think it's crazy too, but it's such a matter of perspective, right? Because it's crazy to me that they say Harry Reid stopped the filibuster, and so Mitch was just getting back at him. And I'm like, yeah, but Harry Reid, like if we could keep on going back and back and back to try to figure out who's really was the first person to start it. And I don't know that we'd be able to determine who was the first to start it. It probably happened in 1942, and don't nobody really remember who started this war in the first place, right?
And does it even matter? Isn't it more important to start asking who's going to stop this so that we can make the progress the country means? All right, so, if you're asking for $2 trillion, is $1 trillion the right answer? Is 1.5? I mean, there is some number in there that everyone would agree is the right thing. Aren't we better off talking to each other and coming to a compromise, which means, again, Biden doesn't get 100% of what he wants, but neither does McConnell. It's something that we have to come to what's in the best interests of the country. We don't have to be making all or nothing decisions. Do
you not think, and maybe I'm just, again, incredibly biased. What about, maybe, of course I am. But it seems I've been reading recently the Doris Kearns Goodwin's biography of Lyndon Johnson. And as I am getting through it, I think to myself, God, like Lyndon Johnson in many ways is president again to me. Joe Biden has an ability that we haven't really seen from anybody in the White House in my lifetime to sort of try to understand that compromise. Who's he having more trouble? Who do you think he's going to end up having more trouble from as he continues through his term? The Republicans or people in his party who don't want to see him compromise?
I think the Republicans, but that may be my Pollyanna bias too. I was a early supporter of Biden. I ran as a Biden delegate. And my main reason was I felt he was the candidate who could defeat Trump.
Right.
That he could attract some some far left Republicans, the liberal Republicans, and that he could appeal to independent voters. And that clearly he would hold on to the Democratic voters who, even if he wasn't as progressive as they wanted, if he wasn't, Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders, he was a good and decent person and was close enough to their views. So I think he really has all the skills that anyone could have ever hoped for, and that he's doing everything he can. But if there's no one listening on the other side, it doesn't matter. That's why I say when Manchin says there are Republicans who want to work with us, I want to know who they are. And I want to know what they want to work with on, because I don't see any evidence that there are Republicans willing to actually sit down and talk.
If he named them, though, Jill, don't you think they would be ousted from their party?
Well, probably. But isn't that, to me, that's a very, very serious problem.
Well, yeah. And Liz Cheney's feeling it right now. Her butt's hurting over that.
Do you think she can
sit down right now? No. Do I think she can stay in as the leader? I mean, it sounds as if though now she's accepted the fact that she can't, right? And it's funny to me to see Democrats praising her. I do praise her. I praise her integrity, and I'm glad people are seeing that. But I hope they remember that next time she disagrees with them, that she's not the devil. She just disagrees with them. Like, John McCain was the hero of America when he thumbs down that vote to not repeal Obamacare. And then 20 minutes later, when he voted on a procedural motion to allow the next part to move forward, people thought he was, the worst thing, that he was abandoning his constituents in America. And I thought, we have to, if we're going to praise people for taking a step in the right direction, we can't immediately demonize them. I mean, when he put his thumb down, he didn't become a Democrat, anybody. I mean, he's still a Republican, right? And Liz Cheney is still going to be she is a Cheney, so she's still going to be a Republican. So while I don't want her to be the Speaker of the House or the President or have much power because of her position, when she votes for something that I adamantly disagree with in the future, I will lament it, but I will remember that she at least is a woman of integrity who I think who is voting for those things because she really believes them, not just because her party wants her to, right?
Yeah. The saddest thing to me is that the bar is so low that we have to say, isn't it wonderful that someone has shown integrity? That someone is willing to accept what is fact. Someone is willing to say, Donald Trump lost this election. And that's the reason that they cannot stay in power, is because they are recognizing reality. Right. That's a pretty low bar. But I agree with you that we have to credit people who take a moral position. Adam Kinzinger, we have to say thank you, Adam. We have to say thank you to Liz Cheney.
And Mitt Romney,
We don't have to agree with anything she, her conservative position. We have to remember that the American Conservative Union thinks she is terrific. And that means that I don't think she's terrific. But I do think she's got some integrity on this issue. And I believe that, I remember the days of, I'm trying to remember the name of the show. There used to be a debate between a Democrat and a Republican that was, you would listen, it was William Buckley.
And Gore Vidal.
Gore Vidal. And you could listen and go, well, that's an intellectually stimulating discussion. I still think that I have an obligation to pay taxes to help other people, and that, whatever your position is, but you could listen and say, you can disagree without being disagreeable. Right. And you can learn, and then you can find ways to a middle ground where you may not get everything you want, but you make the world a better place and you help people. I don't get, for example, on the infrastructure, what is it that's going on here? I mean, it's something that everybody wanted. It's something that the voters
You get
want.
What's going on here, Jill. It's politics. It's politics, and it's not about doing the right thing. It's about winning, right?
But politics wasn't always this kind of winner take all. It was always a time of compromise, and we're so not in an era of
we
compromise.
have two levels now, right? And maybe it certainly has something to do with media being far too polarized, but it also has, I have a theory that it has something to do also with the fact that everything is either a 0 or a 10 now. We don't have any middle grounds. And I think to myself, I look back at 2008, and I did think Sarah Palin was a dumpster fire, but I look back at 2008, where we genuinely had two very good Americans running for president who had faith in the country, who wanted the best for the American people, but had very different ways to get there. But I think about that race and how much, my party demonized John McCain and how much the Republican Party demonized Barack Obama. And then I look at how much my party demonized Mitt Romney in 2012, and then 6 years later thought, oh crap, shouldn't have done that. He was a good guy after all. And I think if everything is a 10, if John McCain in 2008 was going to ruin America and he was a 10, and Mitt Romney in 2012 was a 10, like where did the Republicans have to go next? They had nowhere else. I mean, if everything's a 10, might as well run a Muppet, which, a Cheeto, Jesus. And so, and that's one of the reasons that I kind of really love Joe from the beginning too, is because to me, he was sort of like our response to their 14 wasn't a 15. Right. It was a 6 or a 7.
Yeah.
But the world hasn't followed, right? Everything that Biden does is still like he's the most liberal since Karl Marx. And
he's a communist. Right? He's a socialist.
So at that point, what do Republicans expect? That, hopefully Joe will serve his term and maybe and another one too. But what do they expect next? If Joe Biden is a communist, we might as well run a real one next time,
Yeah.
I'm not advocating for that, but I'm just saying.
I mean, I think the truth is that no matter what they said, they have been unsuccessful in tarring him with those labels. Yeah. That people see Joe as Joe, and they see him as a middle of the road. And yet, I mean, there is no getting around that his platform and some of his proposals are definitely on the progressive side, not as progressive as the progressive wing of the party would like, but certainly more progressive than the Republicans want. But there's room for compromise. We're back to the same old, thing. There's room for and need for compromise to make any progress in America. We're just. The other thing that's wrong right now, I think, is that the states have gotten so much power, and the Republicans have been wise in spending a lot of time and effort in taking over the governors of many states and the state legislatures. And that's where we're getting into this voting repression stuff, is because states are allowing it. And we're getting into a lot of other issues that the states can maybe get away with doing. And if we don't pass laws like, H.R. 1, and we don't pass, the George Floyd Policing Act, it's up to the states, and they're controlled by Republicans. And so Democrats have to start spending some time, not just at the federal level, but they've got to start spending some time. I come from a pretty blue state, so I feel safe here. I don't feel like my voting rights are going to be taken away. But if I lived in Kansas,
North Carolina,
I'd be plenty worried. So, Alabama, Mississippi. I mean, there's a lot of places.
Well, they gave up on their rights
to worry about. Yeah, I mean, so we have to think about that.
You said something a minute ago, and I could totally talk for hours because I have so many things I want to ask you about, but let me try to stay focused. You said something a minute ago about, you said you started by saying the moderate, then you called them the far left Republicans, and it made me wonder. I was going to ask you where the Reagan Democrats of today are, but then I thought, do we even know what the political spectrum looks like? Is it the same as it used to be? Used to be you had people who were on the right who were for small government and big corporate opportunity, and on the left you had people who were for more government influence and less power for companies. But now I feel like Republicans have on the far right a lot of blue collar workers who are not necessarily voting for Republicans because they want them to give Amazon more authority and less taxes. And you have people on the left voting for Democrats, but they seem to want more, allow like speech to be restricted in ways. I mean, the spectrum doesn't even look the same way that it used to, does it?
It doesn't. And when we talk about more government, less government, it's more government from the Republican side when it's a matter of a woman's right to choose. Well, no, the government has to get in there and stop that woman's right to choose, but not when it comes to funding pre-K, for example, or any of the other, issues that we as Democrats think are good social policies. And it has gotten very complicated to try to figure out, and that's why I was having trouble defining it, but there is a range of Republicans. There are still, I'm sure, people who are Republican because they think that small government is good and that lower taxes, I mean, they may still believe in trickle down. It's hard for me to believe anybody still believes that.
We're still waiting for that trickle.
We've been watching for a long time and nothing's happened. So I don't get it, but at least as a way of explaining what people think they mean, and maybe they have some
job creators now, right?
Yeah, right. Well, I don't see them creating jobs, and I can see where the infrastructure bill creates jobs and creates training for good jobs. A little known fact about me, I was head of career and technical education for the Chicago Public Schools. And I learned so much about what used to be called vocational education, which was a total bad way to call it because nobody thought that it actually gave you vocational training and nobody thought it was education. But that's not what it is these days. It is fabulous training for very good paying jobs. And it is definitely essential to education. And it shows people, for example, if you want to be a chef, if you want to be a nurse, if you want to be a carpenter, well, if you want to be a carpenter, you have to know geometry, because if you don't know what a right angle is, how are you going to build a house that's going to stand up? And it makes people do better in school because they suddenly understand, I want to be a car mechanic. Why do I need all this stuff? Well, if you can't read the manuals, if you can't operate a computer, you can't be a car mechanic nowadays. So it's, and this is one of course, Biden's, he's very big on this kind of training. And his new proposals for infrastructure and for jobs creation include the kind of training to let people really be prepared to deal with the world. And so when you mentioned, as you just did, the blue-collar workers who are voting Republican, they are voting against their own best interests. And so then you have to say, well, is it because it's social issues?
I was going to ask that, yep.
It's this, yeah. I mean, so then it gets down to, is that how we decide? Even though I, as a blue-collar worker, will benefit from the programs that are being offered by the Democrats right now, what is the issue that's stopping me from voting for the Democrats? And we have to, sort of sort that out in some way.
That's sort of a James Carville type argument, right? To bring in one more Politicon podcast into the conversation. James,
a good one,
very
a good one.
He's always said it's the economy stupid, it's the economy stupid. And he tends to be right about that. But unfortunately, we are arguing social issues on both sides. Republicans use social issues to get their folks to vote against their own interest, and Democrats use social issues too to get folks to the polls, because that tends to motivate Democrat and progressive voters to show up to vote when oftentimes they won't for other reasons, right?
Yeah, and everybody's entitled to their own opinion of social issues, whether, on any of those issues. But some of them are based on science and fact, and some are not. So whether
but you're an
it's
elitist, Jill Wine-Banks, for thinking that you should feel that we should look at college-educated folks for our guidance and information. I learned something different on Facebook.
I don't think you have to look at highly educated people to reach the conclusion that the vaccine works, that masks work, that social distancing works, and to make masks a social issue is just beyond my comprehension. It leaves me just totally befuddled as to how that could be. And there are so many things that are said that you go, what is going on here? With the recount in Arizona, that's one of the most dangerous things that's going on right now. And it's based on
bamboo strands.
It's based on, well, I have bamboo in my backyard.
Oh, Lord.
I might have made that paper. And I just looked up for another conversation. I just looked up about American paper makers, manufacturers. They use bamboo. Yeah. Bamboo is the most sustainable. So who cares that there's bamboo in it? Doesn't mean it came from China. Could it come from here?
That is sort of a lawyer attorney technique too. Sometimes you have to find what you have to know the solution you want and work backwards and figure out what arguments will work for you. And that's sort of an example of that, right? They know what they want is to prove that this is wrong. And so let's find the arguments, whether they make sense or not, right?
Well, so far they're not making any sense. So ultimately, they do have to make sense somehow, and they aren't.
My personal opinion is let them do it. It's fine. Biden's president, Harris is vice president. On we'll move as a country and let them have their own little party over there.
No, I don't agree with you on this. This one I have to say I do not agree because I predict that the cyber ninjas are going to say there were 40,000 ballots illegally dumped by the Chinese, and that's going to be carried by Fox News and OAN and Newsmax, and the people who watch those as their only news source are going to go, that's just proof that Joe Biden is not the president of the United States.
70% of them already believe that.
Exactly. And I mean, it's maybe growing higher than that. You have Donald Trump, who just said, using a reference to himself as the president, which he is not, and people believe that. So it is dangerous to let them come out with a phony, baloney description of fake ballots when there are none. And they are hurting the ballots themselves by what they were using blue pens, which is auditors must use red pens because red is not allowed on a ballot. They could be using their blue pens and marking, putting in, okay, this is a Democratic ballot, I'm putting in Trump. That invalidates it. How are we going to know? We will never know if they put it in or if the voter accidentally voted for
Jill,
two
I
people.
can't deal with another ulcer. I don't need another ulcer. I can't. I want to move on real quick. We have some folks who did write in questions because they wanted to ask you. And this one I'm going to start with because Shannon from LA wants to know, where do you get all your positive energy? It seems like you live weeks in a day. And you stay so smiley every time I see you on TV or hear you.
It's just how I was born. I can't, a lot of my friends have turned to, I can't watch the news anymore. It's just too depressing. It's too awful. I can't do it anymore. My own husband says after 10 p.m., I can't watch the news. Because he can't sleep if he does. I just have always been the glass is half full, and I will continue to be that way. And I'm basically an optimistic person. I just think that's a healthier way to live and to be. I'm also a person who, my father was one of those people who said, don't complain, do something about it. And so I have lived my whole life saying, if something's wrong, I have to fix it. Now, sometimes it doesn't work so well, and sometimes it's not my job to fix. My first marriage, for example. But in terms of politics, I feel like I can get involved in a way to help make a difference. And so I get motivated by that, and that's how I do it. I stay medicated. Al from Springfield, Illinois. So not yay.
If Trump is found guilty in any court, should Biden pardon him in the tradition that Ford pardoned Nixon?
No. um, and I have to give some history on that because obviously I was totally against Ford pardoning, especially pre-pardoning Nixon, who never got indicted because when we wanted to indict him, even after he resigned, while we were debating within the office with the special prosecutor, who was by then Leon Jaworski, he got pardoned, and that ended our opportunity. Because whatever argument you could make about indicting a sitting president, it could interfere with his being president while he's, and he has to take care of those things. Not that I think that Donald Trump was. He was off playing golf more than anyone else. But I think that Richard Nixon was forced to resign. He didn't lose the election. He was forced out of office. So he had a severe penalty. He did suffer. And there was widespread acceptance of his guilt. In today's world, there is not widespread, Democrats and some Republicans certainly believe he's guilty. I mean, even Mitch McConnell said he hasn't gotten away with what he did on January 6th. There is the civil justice system and there is the criminal justice system. So there is some recognition that he's guilty. But I think in this case, the only way to move on is to make sure that there is a finding of fact. And then I could point to the fact that when you accept a pardon, were he to accept a pardon, he is admitting guilt. There is a Supreme Court case that says if you accept a pardon, it's because you are accepting that you have done something. You have to admit to guilt. When Ford sent an offer of a pardon to Nixon, he sent it with a lawyer who brought with him the Supreme Court case to show to former President Nixon, saying, you have to understand that if you accept this pardon, you are admitting your guilt. And so, there is that to be said. But I do think the country would be better off if, for example, Nixon had been tried and convicted, maybe Donald Trump wouldn't have felt as free to do what he has done for the last 5 years.
That is a good point. I'm going to make the producers mad because I can't let go of you. I want to ask this, follow up on this, and ask if Donald Trump's catalyst to being elected, if his rallying cry was in the campaign was the corruption of the Democrats, and if what kept him alive through his 4 years in office and a good portion of his campaign was, and we got to remember, he did win the second highest votes of any president in history, right? In this election, he ended up coming in.
Yes, but he lost by more than 7
I'm not
million,
questioning that.
So.
Yeah, you don't have to hit that. But I'm saying he did inspire a lot of people to show up to the polls for him.
Yes.
Thankfully, Biden inspired more, but he got a lot of folks there, and a lot of that was based on his ability to convince them that the deep state and the swamp and the liberals were out to get him. It was a witch hunt. All they want to do is get him. Given that, if he were to be convicted after a trial, and then Biden were to pardon him and keep him from having to serve time, wouldn't that sort of take the teeth out of his argument about everyone being out to get him, about it being a witch hunt? Wouldn't a pardon kind of take away some of that fuel for him? And wouldn't not pardoning him perhaps simply just fuel the fire for the next person, the Josh Hawley, the Matt Gaetz, to run on, see what they did to Trump, we got to take the country back? I mean, is there not a bit, I'm not advocating for a pardon or against it, but wouldn't there possibly be some political benefit to going ahead and doing it just to say, y'all, shut the hell up with your we're out to get him. I pardoned him, so you can't call that shit on me. I mean,
you make a very persuasive argument, and there is absolute truth to it. The reason I'm glad I'm a lawyer and not a politician is because I can sit and say, this is what the
Right.
law is,
Right.
and this is what justice requires. Politics is a different thing. When I was Deputy Attorney General, I was very glad that the Attorney General had to make the political decisions, and I could say to him, here's what's right. And I think, if Donald Trump is convicted, but I don't care if he goes to jail. I think it would be absurd to have a former president in jail. I mean, I can't even imagine the cost of housing him. It would be
Right,
be
because he
absurd.
wouldn't lose Secret
But
Service protection because he had not been impeached, right?
Yeah. But I think conviction and a trial, an open trial, I can't help but think that the Derek Chauvin trial had to have influenced many people who thought, he wasn't guilty. Watching that trial, you could not watch it and not conclude that he was very guilty.
Right.
And I think that watching a well-crafted presentation of evidence on one of many possible indictments of Donald Trump, whether it's for January 6th, whether it's for, one of a number of other things, including sexual assault, I think that people would see the evidence and be persuaded in the same way that the Republicans were in Watergate and that many Republicans were after watching the Derek Chauvin trial.
You're right, Jill Weinbanks. You are an optimist. Because I don't know if they would. Last question from a guest, from a listener, before we wrap up. Tomas from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Should Justice Breyer retire?
Well, first of all, Justice Breyer was a Watergate colleague of mine, so I know him. And I think he's one of the best justices we've had. As you pointed out, he's one of your favorites. I think that we are in a very serious situation. And at some point, and I leave this completely up to him, but there is something to be said for having the votes to get a new, younger justice who will last long into the future, so that there is some reason to say that retirement at some point is something that he needs to consider for the good of the country, because it is quite possible, based on history, the president, whatever party the president is from, tends to lose in the midterm. And we are at such a narrow margin, no margin in the Senate, and a very, very narrow one in the House. It means that we'll get nothing done because the Republicans, even when you had a Democratic president and they wouldn't allow a hearing for Merrick Garland to go to the Supreme Court. And how good is it that he's now the Attorney General who's making some really good and hard decisions. So I think, unfortunately, yes, I think we need to make a younger Democratic appointed Supreme Court.
It's tough to say that, I know, because I love him, but
It's very
hard
tough.
I'm glad I don't have to make the decision. Do you talk about all
Yeah.
of these topics on Sisters-in-Law, hashtag Sisters-in-Law, everything? It's not just legal stuff. You cover it all, right?
Oh, we don't do much politics, really, but there are so many legal issues that have political implications. And so for our next episode, we're talking about, for example, sexual assault in the military and what the current commission may be recommending, and how that impacts not just military prosecutions, but what influence it will have on the civilian population. And so we talk about a whole variety of things. We will be talking about the Chauvin trial and the motion for a new trial that has been filed.
Which is typical. I'm going to tune in tomorrow so that I can hear
Yeah.
that conversation. But just to
Yeah.
tease, it's not uncommon. That's something that most attorneys try to do anyway, right?
It's the short answer is this was totally expected and is totally unwarranted.
Right.
It will not. First of all, there will definitely not be a new trial. I mean, I can say that, and I would put money on it. It will get appealed, and I don't think that there is any grounds for reversing the judgment of this.
Well, don't give it all
jury.
away, because people need to find you tomorrow and
Yes,
listen.
for sure.
Kimberly Atkins, Barbara McQuaid, you, Joyce Vance. And you have to search hashtag sisters-in-law when you look for it. But
And hashtag is unfortunately part of what you have to include in the search.
for it. But if you're listening to this, then you already have it on the page for your podcast anyway, because it's in the Politicon family. But you also do iGen Politics, right? So you talk about politics there too.
We do, and that one is an interview format as opposed to just the four of us talking. This I do with an 18-year-old named Victor Shee, who I met when he was 17 and running as a Biden delegate, the youngest delegate for Biden. And we just, we talk from our different perspectives of age, although we mostly agree on everything, quite amazingly. And we have had the most amazing guests. We've had everybody from cabinet officers, senators, congressmen, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Mark Cuban. So it's not just politicians, although we talk to them about, particularly Mark Cuban, we talk politics with. And one of my favorites, of course, was Secretary Albright, who is also a pin wearer. She wrote a book called Read My Pins. So we talked about her book on fascism, but then we talked about her book about pins and the messages they send.
But is Katie Holmes going to be playing her in the movie version of her book?
No, I get Katie Holmes. I get Katie Holmes, and she is not in Connecticut filming The Watergate Girl. She is filming a different movie in Connecticut. But she is going to be playing me.
In The Watergate Girl, which is your book that people should grab and read too, because it's got even more in-depth stories than the ones you shared with us already. Listen,
it does.
There's so many places you can find Jill Wine-Banks, and God love her for it, because I love this, and I'm so glad that you joined us, because I've been saying to the producers for months now, please call her and have her on, please. And I finally just had to, I think, yell the other day and say, damn it, I'm just ready for it.
Well, see, and I was feeling hurt that you had my other sisters-in-law on and you hadn't had me, but I'm very glad to meet you, and I'm also very glad that iGen Politics is now part of the same family. We're all Politicon family.
You can find all of that in our show notes, iGen Politics and hashtag sisters-in-law. But what we call ourselves, I have to ask you to close. Jill Wine-Banks, how the heck are we going to get along?
Because everybody's going to be an optimist like me. Then we're going to get along, and we're going to learn how to talk to each other and to hear each other. And hopefully facts will once again reign.